Now, the government's stay-at-home message ends today, of course, with the return of the rule of 6 or 2 households now able to meet outside.
Outdoor sports facilities also set to reopen. Outdoor team sports can resume. Joining us now, the Minister for Tourism and Sport, Nigel Huddleston. A very good morning to you, Mr Huddleston. I wonder first, in your role as Minister for Sport, whether we can reflect on what we just heard Thierry Henry saying about the abuse that players get and generally people get on social media. Why is more action not being taken to make sure that people are not forced off social media? Thierry Henry says it should be a safer place to be, and frankly, what they experience is akin to mental torture.
It absolutely should be a safer place online, and that's exactly why we'll be introducing the Online Harms Bill. We released a white paper not so long ago to cover some of the very issues that Thierry and many others have faced. And the UK will lead the world in this. It will be tackling the abuse. It will be working with social media companies to make sure that they realise their responsibilities.
And if they don't, then we'll be able to fine them up to 10% of global revenues. Can you explain when we can expect that bill? Because I know that Theresa May first proposed this back in April 2019. It's 2 years later, of course. There's been a huge explosion in social media. And right now, as Thierry rightly pointed out, if you try and post something that has copyright issues, so some footage of a goal potentially, or some music, and there's money involved, you can't even post it. However, if it's something racist or something abusive, there is no issues whatsoever. When is this Online Harms Bill going to come into practice? Because until it does, it seems like the social media companies are flatly refusing to do anything other than put the responsibility on the user.
Yeah, well, the bill will be bringing forward in due course, actually. It won't be long now. You're right, actually. We've been talking about it a while, but it's a horrendously complex area. So when you say
it won't be long, are we talking in the next couple of months? Are we talking in the next year? Because clearly we need it now.
I can't give you the exact details, but I mean, the other point I can say, though, is actually this kind of abuse and some of the abuse we're seeing is currently illegal already. Spreading racial hatred and so on online is already illegal, and it should be reported. But you're absolutely right. The social media companies also need to take responsibility here. It's in their own terms and conditions that people should not be spreading this, and they should be proactively taking people down and offline already. And they are doing to some degree, but we'll be bringing in laws to make sure that they're compelled to do so. And if they don't, we'll fine them up to 10% of global revenue. So that's a really significant change.
One of the suggestions that Thierry Henry wants to see is that anonymous accounts should not be allowed. Is that included in the bill?
That's a really complex area. It's not anything we're planning at the moment, because actually there's also an upside to potentially doing that. You've probably spoken in the past to people, experimenting with their sexuality, or indeed have eating disorders and so on. And actually the anonymity online that can help them have discussions can actually be helpful. And also other parts of the world, for example, that are not as free and open as us, the anonymity can actually help express
It's just hard to enforce accountability for what you say if it's not clear who you are.
Well, again, there's a difference between being anonymous in terms of your presence online, and I say there's pros and cons to that, but actually social media companies can reveal, and there are laws to make sure that people who may seem anonymous are actually not anonymous, and actually we can still pursue them
so
through the courts and through laws.
Right, so anonymous accounts is not going to be included in the bill. Let's talk about the restrictions lifting today, because that's a massive event for everybody. There is going to be the rule of 6, or you could have 2 households. Now, I know in the guidance, not in the legislation, but in the guidance, you've said minimise travel. What does that mean?
It means trying to be sensible about when you're travelling. This is not a free-for-all yet. This is a slow and steady removal of restrictions from the lockdown. And when people do travel, we want them to be careful. Want them to think about where they, say, fill up for petrol or food and so on. So yes, you can go and visit a loved one or a relative. If you do travel, you have to then make sure that you meet them outside. That's a very clear message. And also no overnight stays yet. So it is minimising travel. We do understand.
When you say minimise travel, if I'm here in London and perhaps my family is in Northumberland and this is the first time I've been able to go and visit them outdoors and I could manage a day trip, Is it minimising travel to travel that far within England?
There's no restriction in terms of how far you can travel, because it would be unfair if we put a cap of, say, 50 miles or something. Then what if you were 51 miles away from your loved one? That would be unfair. So we haven't put a cap, but we do rely on the common sense of the British public in this, and this is something we'll increasingly see, and people are being common sense. So you can go and visit a loved one, but what we're not saying is day after day after day after day, keep doing that, and then stopping off at petrol stations and shops. There, we want you to think carefully, plan ahead about the travel, so that you can think carefully about minimising your interactions with people as well.
The other thing you're going to rely on, of course, is the police, and the police are sort of being put into an enviable position at the minute because they're trying to measure up how far they have to go to enforce some of the regulations, what they can enforce, and the expectation on the general public with regards to that as well. They are, as I said, in a position that makes it very, very difficult. They're stuck, aren't they, between what they have been asked to do by the government and what we all feel like we want to be able to do now that these restrictions are being lifted. Will
you expect police, for instance, to go in people's back gardens and count how many people there are, or approach large groups in the park and ask if they are one or two households, if there's more than 6 of them?
Look, there's a couple of questions there. I think, first of all, the police do enforce the laws, and they've done a very good job at that, actually, as well as people, as I said, using their common sense and being respectful. So if there are large gatherings, the police can and will continue to intervene. They may inquire as to, are you really a very large family? Because 2 households can mix together. But if there's more than 6 people, it's reasonable to ask the question about whether that genuinely is a gathering that should be accepted. And they can fine people on the spot if necessary. So those will continue. But in terms of in the garden, of course, the police can't delve into people's gardens. We are relying on people to use their common sense, as I said, but also accept the fact and recognise that if you are gathering in large numbers, you are putting your family, the very loved ones you're desperate to see, you're putting them at risk. So please don't do anything that you shouldn't do. We are slowly easing the lockdown measures, and this is part of a process that will ease over the coming months more and more and more. It's just a matter of time before you can get in even closer proximity to loved ones. So please take advantage of the measures that we've got in place today, but don't abuse them.
If you see infection numbers ticking up, will that put the next stage of the lockdown easing on ice?
Well, we do expect, as the lockdown measures ease, for there to be a slow uptick in infection rates. That's naturally to be expected as we get more interaction. But what we want to do is make sure, and this is why we've got the process of the lockdown, this kind of 5-week gap, where we'll be looking very carefully at the numbers over the 4-week period and then making a decision as to whether we can move forward with the next step in the process. It's precisely to make sure that this is a steady and careful removal of the lockdown measures. So we'll be looking at the numbers all the time. There may well be a slight uptick, and that's probably manageable, but we'll be keeping a very close eye on the measures. And of course, all in the meantime, we've got the vaccinations rolling out even more, and that will mitigate some of the pressure.
The vaccinations obviously are hugely important, and we are very pleased with the way that's been going. A lot of people will be talking about summer holidays, of course. We're now being suggested that it won't be August till we get to go abroad. There is an issue with the border with France, though, isn't there, and hauliers that are coming and going, and the testing of hauliers. It's not going to be till the 6th of April that that's going to get brought in. When we're being so on it in terms of keeping an eye on those figures and those numbers, why isn't the government bringing in that testing now? Why not get it done ASAP so we can make sure that any of those hauliers that are coming and staying in the UK for more than 2 days are tested? And if they do have coronavirus, they aren't allowed to, they have to self-isolate.
Well, actually, our borders we've got some of the strictest measures in the world at the moment, and we'll continue to do so.
But they can still come and go, though, can't they? I mean, that's the point. Our hauliers are coming and going.
Well, we also need to implement and announce the measures so people know what to expect, and then bring it in within a reasonable time frame. But I mean, we're talking about next week, so that's fairly fast pace. And of course, we're constantly keeping an eye on what measures we need to implement at the borders, because we do take the safety very seriously, and we're seeing rising infection rates in Europe. And then more broadly, we've got the Global Travel Task Force, which will also be reporting next week to consider some of the international travel measures as well during the summer.